The gas weapons that were utilized in World War I sparked a new era for war strategies. They were able to claim more territory, but also make the war less fatal. On April 22, 1915, during the Second Battle of Ypres, the French army was prepared for a wave of German soldiers to attack, when the Germans released 160 tons of chlorine gas cylinders on the battlefield. The French did not expect this and were fleeing in all directions. 188,706 gas attack casualties occurred in this battle. 6,062 were fatal. The gas masks that were used by the French, US, and British were quite useless, as they did not stop the gas from seeping in, and the gas masks were so hard to breathe that the soldiers would take them off to get air in, but then would breathe even more amounts of the gas, which led to burning eyes, dry burning throat, trouble breathing, nose burning, and some would die of asphyxiation. The Canadian soldiers had done some extra experimenting with chlorine gas and found out if you urinate on a cloth that could counteract some of the gas from seeping in. So, the Canadian soldiers stood their ground against the Germans. Canadian Lieutenant Colonel Ian Sinclair described the scene. Our trenches were shortly filled with them crowding in from out left. They were only blind and choking to death, and as fast as they died were just heaved behind the trench. Throughout World War I, there were many recorded statistics. There were nearly 20 million deaths. 25% died from machine guns, while 49% of the battlefield casualties in World War I were caused by artillery shell shrapnel. 25% died from diseases and 1% from gas. Although the gas was very feared and could be fatal, it was able to clear a whole lot of battlefield because the troops would not be able to stay within the gas. This allowed militaries to use gas to get more territory without killing numerous people. The gas weapons that were utilized in World War I sparked a new era for war strategies that were able to claim more territory but also make the war less fatal. After the first use of chlorine gas, more reliable ways to deliver gas were introduced, as well as more deadlier gases such as phosgen and mustard gas.
Everyone shouted, "Put on your gas mask, lads." Well, I put on my gas mask and that kind of thing, the same as everybody would. And I hadn't it on about 2 minutes. And I began to get sick into my gas mask, you know. Then my ears began to pain me, and I began to find it difficult to breathe. So I either pull the plastic thing off or suffocate. So I pulled it off, of course, scattered around for a while and went down. Luckily, a lad came along just as I went down, and he said, "Where do you hit, mate?" So I said, "I'm not hit, I'm certain gassed." And as he bent down to help me, he said, "No wonder you're gassed, mate." He said, "There's a big piece of German shell in the metal container of your gas mask. That's what hit me early on the day." So, of course, God, I never felt so bad.
Phosgen was introduced in the late 1915 after the Second Battle of Ypres. It was nearly invisible and much more lethal than chlorine gas. Being exposed to it for more than 10 minutes was a lethal injection, whereas with chlorine gas, you would be exposed to it for more than 30 minutes, and you could still see if you were breathing it in because it was green, whereas phosgen was clear, but the smell reeks of hay. Jack Dorgan of the Northumberland Philisters suffered from poison gas. He explained how he and another British soldier were affected. Our eyes were streaming with water and with pain. Luckily, again for me, I was one of those who could still see, but we had no protection, no gas masks or anything of that kind. All we had was a roll of bandages from our first aid kit, which we carried in the corner of our tunic. So we had very little protection for our eyes, and even then, you had to be sent back if you could not see. Anyone who could see, like I was, would go in front. And half a dozen or 10 to 12 men, with their hand on the shoulder of the man in front of them, would head back towards Ypres. Lines and lines and lines of soldiers going back. In the summer of 1917, the Germans released mustard gas. It attacked the skin and blinded its victims, thereby defeating existing gas masks and respirators. Some of the effects of mustard gas would permanently damage the skin, so there had to be surgeries done on the soldiers. Here are the effects of mustard gas on soldiers. And here are the effects of mustard gas on the human lungs. Fritz Haber was a brilliant Jewish-German chemist who was famous for the process of extracting nitrogen from the atmosphere and converting it to ammonia using the Haber-Bosch process. This was his formula. He enabled the mass production of fertilizer and, ironically, explosives. Haber proposed a solution to the stalemate that was killing thousands of his fellow Germans and dragging his country towards defeat and humiliation. His idea was to use poison gas to either kill large numbers of enemy troops or at least drive them out of their trenches. German forces could then attack through the breach created, and the stalemate then could be broken. Fritz Haber was later hired by Hitler in World War II to use his plans of gas. After the 160 tons of chlorine gas were released over 10 minutes and wafted slowly towards the soldiers were in shock in the moment and watched in complete astonishment as a ghostly 1 to 2 meter high green fog slowly drifted closer to them. The Allied soldiers noted a strong irritating odor, like a mixture of pepper and pineapple, and then began to wheeze, cough, choke, and even suffocate. Many men would literally drown or asphyxiate in the gas. Over a few minutes, about 8,000 to 1,400 soldiers were killed, another 4,000 injured, and many ran away in fear. This created a 7-kilometer gap in the Allied lines, just as Haber had predicted. The Germans attacked and took 1,800 injured gas prisoners. This led to the whole world banning the use of chemical weapons in wars. This was called the Geneva Protocol. This shows that even though the gas weapons were not as deadly as other weapons, they were still one of the most effective war strategies that were developed in World War I, thereby sparking a new era for war strategies.